Sustainable Agricultural Systems Research National Program. Both programs conducting critical research to understand the soil, air, farm, agro ecosystem, and developing solutions to current and emerging natural resources and agriculture production problems. Dr. Knabel earned his PhD and MS degrees in biological sciences and sciences at the University of Cincinnati. Take it away.
Thank you very much. Great to be here. Great to see some familiar faces. I lived in Syracuse for many years, then took a job as the national program leader that was just mentioned. Retired from that, so I'm back as a senior management advisor for the USDA ARS in those same roles, but really focusing on PFAS. And here's where I do the government disclaimer. Because I'm not a government employee, I have to state that these are my own views. I have run this by my management and leadership, and they're fine with the slides, but just need to state that. And the previous presentations are a wonderful combination of information that leads to where I'm going to be going, and that's with the impact of PFAS on the agricultural community. And I'll walk into that a bit, but I want to make sure I hit the right one. That was a pointer. Here we go. So what is ARS, Agricultural Research Service? I'll share that when I started with ARS, I hadn't really known anything about the Agricultural Research Service. It's a fascinating organization. If you're a student or a postdoc and interested in research in one of the domains of agriculture, I highly recommend it, and here's why. You notice some of these other organizations that have competitive funding opportunities in different topics. These are often driven by what are the current needs of society, so RFPs based on the current issues. And ARS is very different. It's the internal funded agency of the USDA. We conduct intramural research. We do not have to compete for funds. And so we are appropriated by Congress to do the work that Congress directs us to do based on priorities brought to them by stakeholders, individuals, and other entities. Same type of setup for our research directions. We do go through a long programmatic review to set the right priorities, an independent anonymous review. But we're funded for 5-year increments. And so there's a long-term effort to address problems. You don't have to go seek external funds, but we can. Our scientists can go do that. And here's a little bit more about us. We have 4 research domains that are split up around the different areas of food production. And you can see what those are there. I'm in the natural resources group. What's fascinating about them, or us, is, I guess them now that I'm a contractor, is that we have 2,000 PhD scientists, and I liken these to endowed chairs because they're fully funded, they have technical support in the labs, and they have all the support for the research provided by their appropriate funds. We have 8,000 total staff, so we have other folks helping this along, 660 projects, and an annual budget of almost $1.9 billion. 90 locations around the United States and 4 international locations. And you can see the locations separated here, often put in place because of the commodity groups or the interest groups that were there, or perhaps a congressperson wanted that in their particular district. But regardless, we have a broad coverage. These wonderful scientists, some of the most passionate scientists I've ever been able to engage professionally. And we're tasked with solving problems. We do some basic research, but a lot of it is solving problems, and PFAS is certainly emerging as one of those. And so for ARS, this is some common information about the problem, but it's really hit agriculture hard. And because of the long-term use of biosolids as a soil amendment, or using groundwater for irrigation or animal watering, without knowing that those biosolids or that aquifer water might be contaminated with PFAS, and as we've learned, has been. We do have a research enterprise group that I've stood up of our scientists. It's a small group compared to those 2,000, about 31 scientists. You'll see that in the next slide, broken up in those different groups. And I am running a meeting in Washington, D.C. in the last week of July. We're still working on the venue, but we'll be between states, federal government, and university researchers to really try to solve the problems, but really focus on agricultural endpoints. And there are several of those. So here's that research enterprise group. I'm not going to leave this here, but I think these slides might be available. But the number of scientists and our topic areas. One of the questions we're really wondering about, besides the research on the environmental fate, the effects on animal and livestock, or what are the social and economic impacts of PFAS and PFAS regulations on the agricultural communities and on farmers? Because you'll be hearing 2 examples of that coming up. So again, this summarizes just what the farming community's been hit with, and I want to just talk about 2 gentlemen or families who I know, Art Schaap and Brian Adam Nordell, and they're not alone in this. They're kind of like the patient zero for their particular states, and I'll start with Art Schaap. This is Art and one of his farm workers, and his son has a dairy in Clovis, New Mexico. In this report from 2011, you can see he was now the New Mexico Beef Council Director. And here's some of the things that he said in this article about his life. That he loves what he does, inspires him most the ability to be an active participant in the cycle of life, love making a product from the ground, just a passionate man. And then he says it takes care of our cows like family. And in 2011, he's been in business for decades. And then they're close to an Air Force base, and you're going to see that in the slide coming up. They visited him, and they said, we think that your groundwater might be contaminated with these forever chemicals. What are forever chemicals? So a lot of people don't know about that, didn't know about that. And sure enough, his land was, and his animals were, and this is what happened. So he needed to start dumping 15,000 gallons of milk a day, and also had to euthanize 4,000 of his cattle. So imagine getting news from a local Air Force base that you had no idea was doing this, and all of a sudden you're now faced with having to do that. And I talked to Art a couple different times, but asked him if it was okay to talk about his story. He said yes. So again, this is in 2018. He is resolving this. There's been some lawsuits, as you might imagine. And here's where the Air Force Base, the Cannon Air Force Base, is in proximity to his, and the groundwater flows. Surprisingly, his is one of the only dairies affected because of the groundwater flows. So there's a need for the data on that. But when he gets this all settled, he's moving, because when he walks out his front porch, he sees Clovis the Cannon Air Force Base. So it's really a human story. That we're working on these regulations, we're working on the science, but this impact on agriculture and farmers is really critical. Moving now to the other part of the country, Adam Nordell and Joanna Davis of Unity, Maine, bought a farm and wanted to start doing organic production, because that was sort of their passion, raise their family in Maine, have this idyllic life. So it's sort of organic, and you can just see that they were really intent on engaging their community. They had a call that they were, Maine is really leading the charge as far as states on this, and they found that their land, decades before they bought it, had been treated with biosolids as an amendment, and without their knowing it was contaminated with PFAS. So their water well read high, they've got it in their blood. And so it was really another human impact story. We were reeling from this. The interesting thing about Maine is there's a Maine Farmland Trust, and they've initiated a $70 million effort to help farmers addressing the PFAS problem. So Adam's farm and his family's farm and 2 other farms in Maine are being purchased by the trust and then to be set up as research sites, so that you can take it, scientists can now conduct research on a contaminated site. So to me as a scientist, I love solving problems. Like I mentioned, we do this problem solving, but in talking with farmers, and we had a meeting in Michigan in October, and a lot of farmer panels, and just how their lives are being turned upside down. So they're the problems. Their problems are the ones that we're trying to solve with that research enterprise group and the meeting coming up. But it has a really human aspect to it. Some farmers don't want to test their lands because they don't want to find out. And so there's all kinds of data and personal information questions that are coming up too. But again, we have these research challenges that are being presented. And again, ARS, its organization, is an interesting one, because we are a scientific organization. We conduct research in laboratories or in the field. But we have to have value to our stakeholders, so we have to engage local farmers of all those 90 locations. How are we solving your problems? And boy, are we getting this. The National Association of State Departments of Agriculture recently communicated that the Farm Bill was their #1 priority. Second was PFAS. So it's a priority for agriculture. Thank you.
Representative are those two cases? How deep were those wells?
I'm going to say the word fairly representative, which is intentionally vague. A lot of farms that have been tested in Maine. Maine is doing a lot of this work, and they're coming back with a lot of detects. They know where all the biosolids went. They've kept good records on that, but they are expecting to try to be finished with that assessment of the potentially contaminated areas by 2025. I'll share it this way. These farmers have come forward, or they've been in the spotlight. Other farmers that are being hit by this don't want to talk about it. So,
Thank you, David, for grounding us in the human story. We really appreciate you for that.